Okay, so welcome to the workshop for the NUTA program for the Global Admissions Literature program of the Masters 5.0 classes. Today, we have a lot of people here, so if we have any questions during the meeting, please just hold them until the end of the presentation, and then we'll have some time for a little bit of Q&A. Okay, so first off, let me just give a kind of brief overview of sort of the Master 5.0 changes in general. So with the change from Cheongdam 4.0 to Cheongdam 5.0, the main change has really just been in terms of adjusting some of the content, especially for the master's programs. So previously we had masters split into the two types, L series and the N series. So L for literature, N for all things non-literature. And then so with the new programs, what we're trying to do is to try to integrate some of the components of both fiction and nonfiction parts. And so we created a number of different tracks that sort of incorporate both elements in the programs. And the reason for this was to basically have sort of a broader range of topics, a greater diversity of topics, such that students and instructors can, have a little bit more interest in some of the programs. And so they can sort of pick and choose what kind of programs might be interesting for the students as they get to maybe know the students better. A lot of the programs also in the 4.0 programs didn't have a ton of actual content in terms of the smart textbooks and things like that, especially with, for example, the debate courses. There wasn't a lot of actual focus on the skill lessons and exercises. And so a lot of the expectations were put on the instructors to come up with their material on their own. So with some of the changes, we're trying to incorporate more actual material that the instructors can use so that not so much of the prep is on the part of the instructors themselves. Okay, now for today, we're going to be focusing on specifically the Track 5 Global Admissions programs, but just a brief overview of the other tracks. So the first three tracks are kind of the main tracks of the Master 5.0 programs. So we have track 1 is the art of storytelling, which is focused on storytelling through different mediums, whether it's writing or through like drama or podcasting or film, and just different kinds of storytelling that students can both learn about and do themselves in terms of projects and writing assignments and things like that. Tracks 2 and 3 are relatively similar in terms of the structure. They're both focused on particular subjects and about discussion amongst the students with the instructor and learning about these topics and doing projects on researching about them and incorporating some of those ideas into their own ideas into whatever the topic is about. The main difference, though, is in terms of what types of subjects. The Track 2 World-Class Discourse is relatively broad. It's more of a humanities-focused track where a lot of the programs will touch on things like psychology or sociology, philosophy, subjects like that, versus the Track 3 Insights into Megatrends focuses on major megatrends shaping civilization. So things like changes in technology, climate change, and kind of more, I guess, on the sciencey side, while Track 2 is more on the humanities side. Track 4 is debate, and so we're revamping a lot of this. And then so putting a greater emphasis, especially on Asian parliamentary debate, since that is the debate style that is the main focus of competitions here in Korea, and the ones that our students will participate in. There will also be Model UN and mock trial classes for other styles of debate as well. For this workshop, though, we're focusing on Track 5, Global Admissions. Global Admissions is kind of divided into two sections. The first is the TOEFL classes, which I'm not going to touch on too much, but essentially the TOEFL classes are just a sort of migrating of the previous T101 and T102 programs. Most locations utilize just paper textbooks for their TOEFL prep because it's fairly difficult to create a lot of this content for the smart textbooks. So there's not going to be too much updating on this. But essentially it's there for having a TOEFL test prep class. The other element of this that we're going to be more focusing on is literature classes, which is going to be a sort of revamping or migration of the previous L programs. And so that's kind of been the main goal of this track, is to update the literature programs, because I know a lot of instructors like to teach literature, and given that we're English Academy, so a lot of the focus on reading novels and fiction, a lot of students enjoy as well. So we wanted to keep it, but sort of reorganize it in a more condensed fashion, while also leaving it open to having other programs in the first 3 tracks. Okay, so in the winter term, these are the programs that will be available in the different tracks. So first, track 1 has ST 101 through ST 204. Here, Storyscapes, from story to screen, career portfolio, drama and performance, data literacy, and journalism. Track 2, for the WD programs, we have these 8 programs here. And then for the megatrends, we have these 4 programs: IM 101, 102, 103, and 201. Then track 4, the debate programs. And then track 5, these are the ones that we will have available in the coming term. There are still more programs being developed as we speak, and so these will become more populated in the near future. Okay, so I'm going to focus mostly on the programs in track 5 and just give you guys some detail on each of the different programs. So this, as I said, most of these programs are literature programs that we had previously in the L track that we've sort of revamped and changed a bit to either condense the program a little bit, maybe reduce the reading load a bit in order to make it a little bit more manageable for the students in their classes. So these are the programs that we'll have available for the literature programs going into the coming term. So GL 101 and 102, coming of age literature and social conflict literature. The GL 200 programs, so spiritual literature, dystopian literature, and wartime literature. And then finally, GL 301, which is advanced literature and composition. I'll go into detail with each of these programs in just a moment. But basically, I also want to touch on briefly sort of what the different codes mean. So each of the programs in the Master 5.0 classes has a program code attached. And basically, the first 2, the alphabets are just saying what type of track they are. So GL for global admissions literature. And then the number, it represents the level of the program. So we have 100 level, 200 level, and 300 level courses. And in general, across the different locations, the master students, if there is a large enough student base for the master students, we start to have a sort of differentiation between the levels within the actual master program. So there are students who are brand new to masters, students have been around for multiple terms, some who've been around for years. And then so obviously for those who have been around for a lot longer, they need some more challenging material. And so the different levels sort of are to represent those different levels. So the 100 level would be for more introductory level master students, 200 level will be for veteran students, and then 300 level will be for extremely veteran students, where if you have students who've been around for multiple years, they should maybe take some even more advanced programs than the 200 level ones. Okay, and then for the test side, we have GT 101 and GT 102. These are just migrations of the T101 and T102 programs. So T101, GT101 is reading and listening. GT102 is speaking and writing. These programs are basically just weekly simulation tests with content for reading and listening. And so instructors would teach based on that. Okay, so for the literature program specifically, these are mostly revamped versions of previously existing L module programs. So from the older programs, so L101, 102, 103, 104, 105, et cetera, we surveyed the different branches and tried to figure out which books the students actually received, which books were received well by the students. And so we tried to select just a few of those books and utilize those into make sort of a more condensed program. And so the GL 101 and 102 programs specifically are all using books from the previous 100 levels. The 200 level programs, with the exception of 202, are just are mostly just migrated directly from the previous programs, some of the more advanced ones that were well received. All of these programs have detailed segment guides that are available in the FTP and on MERP under class material. Once you log in and have the class assigned, you can download it there. And any other additional class material will be available in the FTP as well. So I'll explain also what kind of additional class material there will be. In general, these classes are structured into 3 main sections, sort of for each of the hours of the class. So first hour, reviewing homework and the assigned reading. And then the second hour, a deep dive into the reading and some sort of literary skill lesson relevant to the week's lesson. And then finally, the third hour, project or writing / presentation for the class. The last weeks of the term, lessons 10 through 13, are focused on the final project, which involves writing a term paper and a presentation in the final week of class. I'll go into a little more detail with that as well. Okay, so first I'd like to show the segment guide here. Let's look at the final project. I'll just close that. Hold on. Okay, so the segment guides are split based on the different levels. So GL 101 and 102 structurally are almost exactly the same. The only difference is the actual books and some of the specific content of the lessons. So the segment guide has a breakdown of objective, the syllabus of the programs, and then the class structure. So this is the general class structure that you'll have for the programs. So for lessons 1 through 12, the structure is identical here for each lesson. The beginning of the class, of course, you'll do administrative stuff, and there will also be vocab tests, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Then we have the actual pages divided up into these categories. So first, the Scout page is similar to the stimulus page from like C2, where basically this will be to recap, review anything, and introduce what central questions might be relevant to that lesson. The dive pages would be similar to the, I forget what color they were, but in V1, like the pink pages, I suppose, but the ACT pages, where this will be have quotes from the book for close reading and specific detailed discussion and analysis of the reading. This will make up the bulk of the first hour and bleed into the second hour. Then the other part of the second hour will be the explore pages. This will be a skill lesson regarding literary elements or devices or writing skills that are relevant to literary analysis or relevant to whatever that week's project may be. So these skill lessons include things like characterization, symbolism, how to write paragraphs in a literary essay, things like that. And then finally, third hour project broken into frame, ideate, materialize, and presentation sections. Lesson 13 is the only one that's a significant departure from the other ones. Lesson 13 will be largely the students just presenting for the whole day. So this is pretty much just, recap anything, prepare for their last minute preparations for their final presentation, and then conducting their actual presentations. Okay, and then these are some notes, some tips on conducting discussion and checking reading comprehension, and then details about each of the different components, et cetera, and things about C-learning, I-learning, et cetera. So all of this in the segment guide available in the FTP. Okay, and then in the teacher's portal, you can access all of these programs that are available in the coming term under 22 winter term. You'll see the programs populated here. So for this, I'll use GL 101 as an example. Okay, so first page, Scout, review of what happened in the previous week's reading, what major questions you might want to discuss in terms of the story. Dive pages, specific passages from the novel with discussion questions. Explore pages discussing literary device and activities related to that. And then the project pages here, broken down frame to introduce the idea, ideate, planning it out, materialize, making the project. Okay, now I wanted to give sort of a breakdown of each of the individual programs. So first, GL 101, coming of age literature. This is intended, along with 102, to be an introductory level master course. And so for students who are brand new to master, or some branches also utilize like a pre-master course for students who are maybe kind of on the fence. And then so the idea of these programs was to facilitate for those kinds of students. So the books that we've selected for this first program were The Giver, The Lord of the Flies, and Ender's Game. And the syllabus is broken down here. So these books all feature, young protagonists dealing with challenging situations, causing them to grow and mature. Each of the lessons are focused on very basic literary elements and devices, themes, characterization, figurative language, symbolism, and so forth. So 102 has the other books that were well received from the 100 program. So The Outsiders, The Great Gatsby, and The Book Thief. Same idea as 101 overall. And then the higher level ones, the GL 200 programs. So GL 201 is just an adaptation of the previously existing L 301 program. So the previously existing 200 and 300 level programs, one of the biggest problems was that there's a bit too much reading in a lot of them. So for most of them, we've condensed them down to being about 3 books. Some of them would have 4 or 5 books, which just ended up being too much by the end of the term. And one of the biggest problems in general for the literature programs is making sure that the students do actually keep up with the reading. So reducing the reading load a bit, hopefully will help a bit. And we also have some other sort of assignments to try to make sure that they keep up with the reading. So spiritual literature, The Alchemist, The Sirens of Titan, and Life of Pi. So these were the same as the existing in L301. We just cut Siddhartha out of the list. 202, dystopian literature. This one was overhauled quite a bit, I guess not too much, but basically we've kept Brave New World and Androids from the previously existing L201 and then added in 1984 as classic seminal dystopian literature work. For this program, especially, the books contain a lot of mature themes. So these are really recommended only for older students. 201 also kind of has that, in Sirens of Titan has some mature stuff, but the other books are mostly fine. But 202 especially, 1984, Brave New World, Androids, they all have a lot of significant mature themes. So just be aware of that if you're going to teach this program. This last program, GL 203, wartime literature. This one is just a slight adjusting of the L204 program, where we've just removed Hiroshima because Keiko and Hiroshima were a little bit redundant since they both touched on pretty similar things in terms of the Japanese side of World War II. However, this one is launching new next term, so the material for this is not completely available. Currently on Teachers Portal, you can access lessons 1 through 4. The subsequent lessons will be launched in batches. So batches of weeks 5 through 8 and lessons 9 through 13. And they should be launched by the week prior to those lessons. So weeks 5 through 8 should be launched in week 4. Lessons 9 through 13 will be launched by week 8. So for now, if you go in Teachers Portal and try to look at lessons 5 through 13, it'll just say like it's currently under construction or something like that. For these books as well, there's also significant mature themes. The things they carried has a lot of, it's about the Vietnam War. There's a lot of violent things that happen, gruesome things, as well as very mature language being used. The Kite Runner also deals with a lot of mature themes. So again, for these books as well, recommended for a bit older students. All right, the last program, this one's the only one that's kind of completely new, is GL 301, Advanced Literature and Composition. This program is intended for students who have been around for a long time. It's like long enough that they've done pretty much every other master program available to them. And so this program, I don't expect to be used by very many people, but basically we base this one on the American high school AP literature programs, and it incorporates practice tests based on the AP literature exam. So the students who are taking this class should be capable of pretty high level stuff with this. But I have run this with my students in the past couple of terms, and they are capable of doing it. And I've been pretty satisfied with their performance in like the practice tests and things like that. This program is a modular program that's intended to be reused sort of indefinitely for those high level students who have attended masters for a long time. And the program itself doesn't have any books assigned directly for it. For those, all books and reading schedules should be determined by the instructor. The book should be selected at least 3 weeks prior to the term start so that staff have enough time to procure copies of the book. And then there are suggestions for structuring the reading schedules in the segment guide, as well as possible books that show up on like the AP Lit program and stuff. And so here are some examples of different sort of reading schedules that I've done in the past. So like 3 medium length novels, so like Never Let Me Go, Beloved, Rebecca, and then maybe 5 shorter works, not necessarily novels, could be novellas or plays even. Or sometimes if you want to read just like a really big one, like one term I did The Count of Monte Cristo, which is a doozy of a book, but that was basically just the whole term of that. So for scheduling the actual books, you just need to be aware of how much reading you're going to be expecting the students to do, and then also planning around things like, for these students at this level, they're probably going to be in middle school, like grade 2, so they're probably going to be doing exams. So planning around those kinds of exams and things like that. The actual lesson content for this is very, very dense, and there's a lot of them per each lesson. And the expectation is that the content in the SMART textbook will not necessarily be used, or not, most of it will not be used in one term. And so some of it will be kind of kept over for future terms. So there are things like, for example, some of the lessons will have short stories printed within the actual SMART textbook. These short stories do not need to be read, but are more for if the students don't necessarily, like if the students are coming back from exam at a certain time, then they might not have time to read at home. So then they can read this short story instead in class, and then discuss that in class instead. Okay. And then for all the programs, there are some additional material. It's really important for literature classes that the students actually read the books. There's nothing worse than coming into a class excited to talk about a book that you're reading with the kids, and then it turns out they read like 3 pages, or they just skimmed the Spark Notes or something. And so it can be, of course, be very frustrating because at that point you have to sort of basically explain everything that happened in the book to them. So to sort of get the students to actually go through and read in a little more detail, we have some additional C-learning homework for them. In the GL 100 programs, we have these worksheets called quote notes that look like this. And it's fairly simple, but basically what the students should do is, as they read, copy down 10 quotes from the book, including the page number, and they should write a brief note about why they highlighted that passage. So, maybe they thought a certain scene was interesting, or ideally they would highlight some sort of literary element or device that they learned about. So like, oh, this shows a good characterization of this, or I think this is a symbol for that. The number of quotes that you assign to the students doesn't necessarily have to be like 10. This can be, you can reduce the number as you wish. But basically, the idea here is to get them practiced in terms of identifying and pulling quotes from the book, because a big part of the class is also to get them to learn how to write literary, like analytical essays about literature, which includes incorporating textual evidence. And so for their final project, they'll need that. And so this will be good practice for them in the meantime. For the GL 200 and 300 programs, we have slightly more detailed versions of that same concept. Okay, and so these, I call them annotations. The first page here has an explanation of what the different, what they should be doing for each of the different sections. But on this homework, the main thing they'll be doing are creating these annotations, which are sort of like they would be sort of body paragraphs in an essay that they're writing, but they should have some evidence from the text, and then some sort of main idea, a claim about why they are going to be pulling that evidence from the book. Like, what is the point they're trying to make? So writing the claim, the context of what's going on in the story before that, the quote itself, and then the main part should be the analysis of what they think is important about that piece of evidence. In addition, at the top of the page, this section for questions, the students should write down questions they have about the book. And then the questions, I like to categorize them as either confusion questions or discussion questions. Confusion questions are, they don't understand something that happened in the story, so they can write that here, and they can discuss that in class at the beginning of class in the next week. Discussion questions will be more open-ended, opinion-based questions where the students want, what part of the story do they want to talk about with the rest of the students. So the forms in the FTP have 10 quotes for the L100 programs and then 5 annotations for the 200 and 300 programs. You can adjust this number however you would like. You also don't necessarily need to assign this as homework. It's just the way that, for me personally, is how I've been and how we've been doing at our branch to make sure the students are keeping up with the reading in a meaningful way. These will be available in the FTP, but the assignment of this homework is at the instructor's discretion. It's a lot of homework, sort of, when you add this in on top of their iLearning homework, which I'll explain in a bit. So maybe a little bit too extreme in some cases, but ideally the master classes should be held to a pretty high standard. So the students, they're definitely capable of doing it from my experience. Instructors should check this homework at the beginning of class. The first part of the lesson, specifically for the 200 and 300 programs, will be focused on discussing the book with the students' annotations and discussion questions in mind. Okay, and besides the C-learning stuff, there is also, for iLearning, there are 2 components. There's vocabulary and then writing. For the vocabulary, the students will have vocabulary that comes from the next week's reading. So unlike in the other levels before where the vocab tests are review tests, these are preview tests. So for the first test in week 2, the vocabulary words will be from reading that's actually related to the lesson 2 reading that they would have done for homework. In iLearning, they have vocab review and homework to do, and then in class, there will be vocab tests as well. However, the vocab tests are a bit different than the vocab tests for the different levels, because first, for the first page is still matching, but unlike in the lower levels, the matching is all English to English synonyms. So no English to Korean definitions. And then for the fill in the blank sections, the questions, the students need to actually type out the words with grammar changes. If there are grammar changes, they cannot, it's not just a click and drag as it is on the other levels. So because these are master students, we expect a bit more out of them in that regard. So the tests are a bit more difficult. But to make up for that increase in difficulty, the number of questions is reduced to just about 16 questions per test. The questions also for the fill in the blank, I believe, are also all directly from their iLearning homework. So for students who actually do their iLearning homework, it's relatively easy because they just need to remember what the sentences from the iLearning homework are. They can memorize that directly from their iLearning homework. But it's a pretty easy way of seeing which students are doing the homework and which students are not based on their results in the vocab tests. The writing component for the iLearning, for the L program, all of the questions are critical application, I believe. There might be some creative application, actually, but I think about it. But basically, critical application, essay writing, creative application, story writing. So there's a prompt with questions, the students will write it, and then they'll present it, record it. For this, the iLearning homework is all graded by the iLearning team, scored by the iLearning team. So, thank you, Jay. So all of the homework is graded by the iLearning team. So you don't need to review any of their homework, but you should, make sure that they are keeping up with their homework that you can check through the MERP. All right, lastly, in the program, the students will also have a final project. All of the different master programs have some sort of final project. For the literature one, we have this project that comes in 2 parts, a term paper and a final presentation. The main part of the actual final project is the term paper or their final essay, wherein the students will be expected to write a literary essay about one or more of the works read in class for the term. This essay should follow MLA formatting and include textual evidence and proper citations. Depending on the level, students have different requirements for their word counts. So the 100 level, the word count requirement is 1,000, 1,500 for 200, and 2,000 for the 300 level. These can be adjusted to the instructor's discretion. For this, the purpose of the word counts is, like, for example, the 100 level, my real life expectation is that the students will give me like 750 to 800 words. And by setting the word count to 1,000, they will approach that limit. Of course, you'll also have students who go way above and beyond and then give you like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 word essays that you don't want to read because it's just way too long. But it's better than having too little, I suppose. For the actual prompts, these prompts are available in the actual SMART textbook. So in lesson 10, I believe, is the first one. So starting in lesson 10, the project pages will be dedicated to the final project. And then so here there are different prompts given with sort of sub-questions related to the prompts. The students do not need to use these prompts, but we tried to cover like not every, but many of the possible concepts that they could possibly write about, with each of the prompts tying in with one of the literary devices discussed throughout the term. So these should largely cover like anything that they could really write about or anything that might come to mind. But if the students have a better idea for a prompt, or if you have a better idea for the prompt, feel free to use that as well. The essay structure and writing style. There are a few lessons that are dedicated to writing essays. And then so basically they're the lessons where it's the end of one of the books. So for example, lesson 4 in L101 is the end of The Giver. And so there is a lesson dedicated to learning about how to incorporate textual evidence into their actual essays. And then so there's some examples of how to do that and examples of how to write a paragraph in that regard. So students should have learned this previously in the term, and then by the time they get to the week 10 final project starting, you can refer back to those lessons to give them some ideas on that. And then also in the FTP, there is a worksheet that kind of gives an overview of the term paper, as well as a kind of thorough outline where the students can work on this to sort of fill in like everything that they're going to write about before they actually type it. Of course, their actual final essay should be typed up and either delivered to you, printed out, or through email. In addition, guidelines, the outline, as I mentioned, there's also peer evaluation handouts and a grading rubric that are all available on the FTP that you can utilize. The essay's deadline, the final draft of it should be in week 12, which gives you a week to go through the essays, give them a grade, and return the essays. Week 11, the week before, the third hour should be dedicated to working on the essays and then giving them any sort of feedback or having them conduct peer feedback. So you should hopefully have a pretty good handle on what their essays are like in week 11. So your grading in week 12 won't be too severe. Okay, the last part of their final project is their presentation, and the final presentation, they will just start working on this in week 12. So it's just a 1 week thing that they'll do as their homework. The students will not have any reading homework. So going into week 13, so their only homework will be working on the final presentation itself. For their C-Learn, I-Learning they'll have separate. The presentation involves the students choosing one of the literary elements or devices they learned about in the term or other such subject, and discussing it in the context of a different creative work aside from one of the books they read. So this can include movies, TV, video games, etc., music even. And they will present about that literary element and device, how it's used in the book that they read in the term, and then analyze how it's used in their chosen creative work. Basically, week 13 is dedicated to these presentations. And the idea is that week 13 is all about the students are teaching the class about that device and that creative work rather than you teaching them in all the previous weeks. In week 7, we will have a follow-up workshop focused a bit more on the final project, as well as sort of a check-in with all the Master 5.0 teachers to see how things have been going, any issues with some of the programs up until then. So that'll be in week 7, and more details about that will come later into next term. Okay. And so to kind of close out the meeting, any questions? I know there are a lot of you, but if you have a question, you can just speak up or write in the chat. All right. Doesn't look like there's any questions. Cool. Okay. So last thing. Oh, I hear something. Oh, okay. Last thing. Google form for survey about the workshop. Ah, okay. So Peter asks if there are any external sources to help prepare. So for preparation for the programs, if there is anything that you want to discuss, basically what I do when I'm preparing a class for a literature class is I'll read through that week's reading and then things that, oh, yes, I will then. Anything that comes to mind that I want to discuss. So for each of the lessons, there is some sort of literary lesson related to that. So characterization, symbolism, etc. But if that doesn't jump out to me while I'm reading, I might not necessarily talk about that. And instead I might want to focus on something else. And for most of these books, there's a lot of resources online. So whether it's like SparkNotes or LitCharts or whatever, and I'll basically just Google search about that book and ideas for preparing lessons for that, like lesson plan. So the Giver lesson plans or the Outsiders lesson plans. There's a ton of this. Yes, Kyle, I will send the PPT. Hold on. If I can find it. What on earth is this thing? Okay, sorry. So sent in the chat the workshop notes. So for finding prep for this out in terms of external material, there's no specific source that I use or anything like that, but a lot of like the teaching, in my mind, like teaching, as much as we try to tell kids not to plagiarize, I'm pretty sure every teacher plagiarizes a lot from the internet. So basically whatever book I'm reading or talking about, I'll search for things, ideas online and kind of incorporate that into my lessons. Yeah, I guess that's, yeah, most of the preparation stuff, like they'll kind of depend from lesson to lesson. There's like a lot of material, like SparkNotes, FlipNotes, those kinds of websites are mostly what I use. There's a lot of YouTube videos, breakdowns like Crash Course Literature that will maybe spark some ideas. Thug Notes was a pretty good series on YouTube on the Wisecrack channel that some of these books are included in. hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay, if you don't have any questions and you don't, and you finish the survey, you are free to go. Thank you, guys. I will stick around for anybody who has any last questions.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Ben.
I always do that. I don't know why.
Thank you.
Yes, James, there should be a separate link for the debate meeting. So if I don't know how you guys got sent that, but it is a different one. Here, let me try to find it. I think that should be the one for the debate one.